He stood in the corner of a brightly decorated wedding hall, clapping politely as his younger brother walked hand in hand with his new bride. Guests whispered about the beautiful couple, about the generous gift from the parents, the house that once kept him awake at night, calculating every dollar, eating cheap meals and patching old shoes just to save for it. Now it was being paraded as someone else's blessing. That was the moment. Not a bank foreclosure, not a scam by strangers. No, the humiliation came with the sound of laughter, champagne glasses clinking, and his parents beaming as though they'd pulled off the greatest surprise of the century. A wedding gift for their son. His house, his dream, wrapped in a bow and handed to someone else. You might expect a scene, a public protest, anger, maybe even a dramatic confrontation. But none of that happened. He didn't shout. He didn't even cry. He just clapped along, the picture of quiet resignation, while inside his chest something cracked wide open. So who was this man, standing silent in the middle of his own defeat? Let's rewind. He wasn't born rich, not even close. He was the kind of guy who knew the value of every coin, who carried yesterday's coffee in a thermos to save a few bucks. Every choice was a trade-off. New shoes? No, because the dream was bigger. Weekend trips? Forget it. Every penny belonged to the house fund, the symbol of independence, the proof that he could stand on his own 2 feet. And when that dream was finally within reach, when the paperwork was ready, his parents stepped in with advice that sounded harmless, even wise. Put it under our name, son. Legal reasons, safety, trust us, and trust them he did. Because family is supposed to mean protection, loyalty, and love, right? But what happens when that definition gets rewritten? What happens when the very people you trust the most hold the pen that crosses out your name? This isn't just a story about money or property. It's about betrayal that doesn't come from enemies. It comes from the people you thought would guard your dreams. It's about silence in the face of heartbreak and the unexpected ways life pushes you to rise again. So buckle up, because this isn't where the story ends. In fact, this is only the beginning. Welcome, story lovers. Where are you watching from? Drop your city name in the comments so we can see how far our story travels. Before the wedding hall humiliation, before the silence that spoke louder than words, there was a boy who grew up believing that hard work could outmuscle destiny. He wasn't born with a silver spoon. He wasn't even born with a reliable roof over his head. Childhood was a mix of second-hand clothes, borrowed textbooks, and whispered conversations about overdue bills. His parents were hard-working in their own way, but comfort was a stranger in their household. They juggled jobs that barely kept the lights on, and arguments about money became the background music of his youth. While other kids played basketball after school, he worked part-time at the corner store, stacking shelves and sweeping floors. He wasn't bitter. In fact, he wore responsibility like armor. If the family fridge was stocked, even with the cheapest groceries, he felt like he'd won. But inside, he carried a quiet dream. One day, I'll have a home. A place that's truly mine. Education was supposed to be his ticket out. He studied under dim bulbs, memorized formulas between shifts, and carried his hopes in a backpack patched with duct tape. College wasn't guaranteed. It was a battlefield of scholarships, part-time gigs, and sleepless nights. He dreamed of becoming someone who could stand in a room and not feel less than. Maybe a professional, maybe a business owner, maybe just someone with a solid paycheck and no debt collectors breathing down his neck. But life rarely hands out victories without bruises. He got through school, but barely. No trust fund, no family cushion to fall back on. Every semester meant sacrifices, turning down outings, skipping meals, pawning off things he loved. He didn't have the luxury of finding himself like his peers. He had to survive. And survive he did. He worked jobs nobody wanted, learned how to stretch $1 so far it almost tore in half, and carried forward an unshakable belief. If I keep grinding, it'll pay off. And eventually, it did. Slowly, painfully. He built a routine around saving. No Starbucks runs. No impulsive shopping. Every spare penny went into the house fund. It wasn't about square footage, it was about security. He imagined unlocking the door to a place where no landlord could evict him. No relative could say, This isn't really yours. The dream wasn't luxury, it was stability. The kind he'd never known growing up. But along the way, sacrifices piled higher than his savings account. Relationships slipped through his fingers. Friends mocked his frugality. "Live a little," they'd say. He laughed it off but went home to reheated leftovers, convincing himself that missing out now meant winning later. Holidays? Spent working double shifts. Birthdays? Just another reminder that time was passing while he was stuck in grind mode. Still, he never complained. He carried pride in his discipline. He didn't drink, didn't party, didn't waste. Every time he added a few dollars to his savings, it felt like a personal victory. Yet behind that pride, there was loneliness. He watched others build families, careers, lives filled with laughter and spontaneity. Meanwhile, his life was ruled by an Excel sheet of budgets and a jar of coins that represented hope. Nights were long, mornings early, and his body ached from doing too much for too long. The hardest part? His sacrifices often went unseen, even by the people closest to him. Family dinners ended with subtle jabs about how he never did enough or how he was too careful with money. They mistook his discipline for stinginess, his sacrifices for stubbornness. He smiled through it, hiding the sting, because deep down he thought, one day they'll see. One day I'll prove them wrong. And then came the day. The savings were finally enough. Years of beans and rice meals, worn-out clothes, and endless shifts had built a foundation strong enough to buy that dream home. Signing those papers felt like crossing a finish line no one thought he'd reach. But even in victory, there was a trap waiting. His parents, voices heavy with authority, leaned in with what sounded like wisdom. "Put it under our name, son. It's safer for legal reasons. Trust us, how could he argue?" After all, these were the people who'd raised him, the ones he worked so hard to make proud. To push back would have felt ungrateful, almost disrespectful. So he nodded, signed, and handed over the legal claim to the very thing he had fought for. That decision, made out of love, respect, and trust, was the turning point. Though he didn't know it then, that signature planted the seed of heartbreak. Still, for a brief moment, he let himself feel joy. He walked the empty rooms of his new house, picturing life there, dinners with friends, quiet mornings with sunlight pouring in, holidays filled with warmth instead of arguments. He imagined finally being the anchor in a family that had drifted too often. But dreams can be fragile, and his was balanced on the thin ice of misplaced trust. What came next wasn't just betrayal. It was a reminder that sometimes the people you sacrifice the most for are the very ones who undo you. And it all began long before the wedding hall, long before the clapping and the silence. It began with a boy who wanted nothing more than to own a piece of peace in this world. Every story has a moment where the ground shifts. For him, it wasn't a single explosion of drama, but a quiet decision made in good faith, the day he put the deed of his house under his parents' names. What he thought was a gesture of respect, they treated as a transfer of ownership. And that subtle shift changed everything. At first, it didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like victory. He had the keys, he had the walls, he had the roof. Sure, the legal papers didn't have his name on them, but his heart did. He scrubbed the floors himself, painted the walls, planted flowers in the yard, even though half of them died within weeks. It was his home, or at least it looked and felt like it. There was hope in those days, the kind of fragile hope you carry with both hands, terrified of dropping. For the first time in years, he let himself believe he'd crossed into a new chapter. Friends who once mocked his penny pinching now visited and said, "Man, you really did it?" For a while, their admiration tasted sweeter than any luxury he had given up. But shadows began creeping in, tiny comments from family members that made his stomach twist. His mother calling it our house instead of his. His father joking about how one day it might be perfect for his younger brother's family. He laughed along, brushing it off, but unease clung to him like smoke. And then there was his brother, charming, careless, living in the moment, the opposite of him in every way. Where he had scraped and saved, his brother coasted on charm. Where he sacrificed, his brother indulged. And yet somehow the family always leaned toward the younger one, excusing mistakes, praising mediocrity. He told himself not to compare, not to measure love in houses or favors. Still, each time his parents' attention bent toward his brother, it stung. Didn't they see the years he had given up? Didn't they see the discipline, the grit, the sacrifices made in silence? The tension built slowly, almost invisibly. A conversation here, a look there, each one planting doubt. He wanted to confront it. But how do you accuse your parents of plotting against you when they smile and hug you at dinner? How do you say, "I don't feel safe with you," to the people who gave you life? And yet part of him knew. Deep down, he recognized the signs. The way his mother casually asked if he'd be okay moving closer to work someday, as if this house wasn't permanent. The way his father spoke about family legacy as though the house belonged to a collective dream rather than his personal sacrifice. It wasn't just about the house. It was about respect, about being seen as the man he had become, not the boy they could manipulate. Secondary characters entered the picture too. A mentor at work, someone older who had once clawed his way out of poverty, noticed his exhaustion and asked, "Why do you look like you're carrying the world?" He almost confessed the truth, but instead shrugged it off. Vulnerability wasn't his style. Yet the mentor's words lingered. Don't let your sacrifices be stolen in silence. Meanwhile, a friend, one of the few who knew the full story, warned him bluntly, "Get your name on that deed. I don't care what excuse they gave you. If it's not in writing, it's not yours." It was good advice, but advice is easy to give and hard to act on when love and guilt weigh down your shoulders. He couldn't bring himself to confront his parents. It felt like choosing between protecting his future and accusing them of betrayal, an impossible choice. The stakes grew higher when his brother announced his engagement. Excitement buzzed through the family, but he couldn't shake the gnawing fear that his house, his one victory, might somehow get tangled in the celebration. He told himself he was paranoid. Families don't do that. Parents don't erase one child's dream to gift it to another, but families are complicated. Love and loyalty can twist into entitlement and expectation. And one evening, when he overheard his parents whispering about what a perfect gift the house would make, his heart froze. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was the battleground for his dignity, his sacrifices, his very sense of worth. Ethical dilemmas clawed at him. Should he confront them and risk being branded ungrateful? Should he lawyer up, drag his own parents into court, and burn every bridge he'd built? Or should he stay silent, hoping that love would prevail and his fears were wrong? Silence won, at least for the moment. But silence doesn't erase tension. It sharpens it. Every family dinner, every phone call, every glance toward his brother became charged with invisible electricity. Hope still flickered. Maybe they wouldn't go through with it. Maybe they respected him too much. But fear burned brighter with each passing day. The closer the wedding came, the more that fear turned into certainty. And when the moment finally arrived, when the house keys became part of a grand announcement, his world collapsed. This wasn't just rising conflict. This was betrayal wrapped in ribbon and handed out as applause echoed around him. And in that moment, with his palms stinging from forced claps and his throat burning with swallowed words, he realized something. This wasn't just about losing a house. It was about losing the belief that family always protects you, and once that belief is gone, nothing ever looks the same again. The hall shimmered with gold drapes, clinking glasses and the chatter of hundreds of guests. Music filled the air as the bride and groom twirled on the dance floor, their smiles lit up by the glow of chandeliers. Everyone clapped, everyone cheered. And then, like a drum roll that stretched too long, his father stood up. "Tonight," he announced, his voice booming with pride, "we bless this union with more than just our love. We give them a gift, a foundation for their new life, a home." The room erupted in applause. Guests gasped in delight. His mother pulled out a box with a ribbon. Inside lay the keys to his house. The cameras flashed, recording the parents' magnanimity, the couple's tears of joy, the crowd's admiration. Strangers clapped for a story they thought was heartwarming, parents sacrificing for their children. But there, in the corner, he stood frozen. The air turned heavy, his chest hollow. Those keys were his. The applause, his theft, the humiliation, his inheritance. It was a scene so surreal it almost felt staged. He wanted to shout, to walk up and snatch back what was his, to tell the room that behind this grand gesture was a lifetime of sacrifice they'd erased in one night. But no one was looking at him. He wasn't the hero of this story. He was the ghost in the room. His brother kissed the bride, kissed the keys, and hugged their parents. Guests cheered louder. His mother's eyes sparkled with pride while his father beamed as if he'd orchestrated a miracle. No one clapped for the man in the corner. No one even noticed him. Humiliation isn't always loud. It can be quiet, suffocating, invisible. It can take place in front of hundreds of people who cheer while your world collapses. In that moment, his life felt like a cruel joke. Years of denial, of working while others lived, of saving while others spent, all reduced to a spectacle. A gift. His dream house turned into a stage prop. His dignity, wrapped in a bow and handed to someone else. He didn't make a scene. He didn't grab the mic. Instead, he clapped with them. Each strike of his palm against the other felt like self-betrayal, like a slow bleed. He smiled faintly so the cameras wouldn't catch his devastation. His silence became the family's perfect cover. But silence is not weakness. It's pressure, and pressure has a way of building. After the speeches, after the music roared back to life, he slipped outside. The cold night air bit against his skin, and for the first time, the weight of it all sank in. He had lost more than a house. He had lost the belief that loyalty guarantees loyalty in return. He had lost the illusion that sacrifice equals respect. The climax wasn't just about what happened inside the hall. It was about what snapped inside him. Something shifted. The man who once believed family meant protection realized family could also mean betrayal. The boy who thought discipline guaranteed reward realized that sometimes the world takes what you love most and claps while doing it. And here's the cruel twist. In the eyes of everyone else, the night was perfect. Parents honored, a couple blessed, a family admired. But in his eyes, it was the night everything shattered. The breaking point wasn't about screaming at his parents, dragging them into court, or demanding the world see the injustice. It was about staring into the abyss of his own silence and realizing it had cost him everything. He walked away from the wedding that night without saying a word. No goodbye, no confrontation. Just the sound of footsteps echoing against the pavement, each one carrying the weight of years wasted, trust broken, and dignity crushed. But walking away wasn't weakness. It was the first step toward something else, something no applause, no gift, no betrayal could erase. Because sometimes the most powerful climax isn't the fight you pick, it's the fight you refuse to let break you. Dear audience, if you're feeling this heartbreak, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps share this story with more people who might need to hear it. He didn't return to that house. Not for a visit, not for a glimpse. To him, it wasn't a home anymore. It was a monument to betrayal. But walking away wasn't the end. It was the beginning. For months, the silence was heavy. Nights stretched long, the sting of loss gnawed at him, and the question replayed, why did I trust them? Yet beneath the ache, something stronger was forming. He realized he had two choices: live the rest of his life defined by that moment, or build a life so full, so undeniable that no one, not even family, could erase it. So he started small. A rented one-bedroom apartment, humble but his own. 4 walls no one could claim, a key no one could take. He decorated it with second-hand furniture, not because he had to, but because it reminded him that beauty doesn't need approval. And then he worked. Every shift, every hour, every chance. This time, though, his goal wasn't just survival or saving. It was freedom. He poured his savings into a business idea he'd been sketching for years. It wasn't easy. The first few months were brutal. Mistakes, rejections, bills piling high. But slowly, like a seed pushing through cracked earth, it grew. Clients came, then referrals, then respect. 2 years later, his small venture had turned into something bigger than he ever imagined. He no longer worked for approval, he worked for impact. He created jobs for people who'd been overlooked. He mentored young men who felt invisible in their own families, and he taught them one lesson over and over: Never let silence make you small. And here's the quiet poetry of it all. He bought another house. Larger, brighter, filled with laughter. But this time, the deed was in his name alone. The first night he slept there, he walked through each room barefoot, touching the walls like an artist touching a canvas. It wasn't just a house, it was proof. Word traveled, as it always does. Family noticed. His parents called, his brother sent polite messages, invitations trickled in. They wanted him back at the table they had once pushed him away from. But he didn't go out of bitterness. He went out of strength. When he finally visited, his brother asked, almost nervously, "How did you do it?" He didn't brag. He didn't remind them of what they had taken. He only smiled and said, "By remembering that what's mine can never be stolen if I refuse to give up." His parents lowered their eyes. They expected anger, maybe revenge. But what they saw was worse for them and better for him. They saw a man they couldn't control anymore. The redemption wasn't in reclaiming what was lost. It was in realizing that betrayal can break trust, but it doesn't have to break you. Today he lives differently. He doesn't hoard dreams in silence, he shares them. He doesn't tie his worth to approval, he builds it with his own two hands. He doesn't waste energy on bitterness, he spends it on those who believe in him. Neighbors see him as the man who helps, not the man who was hurt. Young people see him as a mentor, not a victim. And when he looks in the mirror now, he doesn't see the boy who lost his home. He sees the man who built his life. The story of the stolen house still lingers, but it no longer defines him. In fact, it's become his quiet strength. Whenever he meets someone crushed by betrayal, he tells them, "I know the pain of losing everything. But trust me, it can be the soil where something greater grows." And that's his legacy, not bitterness. Not revenge, but resilience. Because sometimes the sweetest redemption isn't in taking back what was stolen. It's in building something no one can ever take. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories every week. They once said he was foolish, too trusting, a dreamer who handed his life's work away with a signature. But here's the truth no one saw coming. That betrayal didn't bury him, it planted him. And from that soil of loss grew a man stronger, freer, and more unshakable than ever. The house they stole, just bricks and wood. The life he built afterward, priceless, because dignity doesn't come from deeds on paper. It comes from standing tall when the world tries to bend you. He could have spent his years bitter, replaying the moment his home became someone else's wedding gift. But instead, he chose silence not as weakness, but as power. He let time reveal what words never could. That resilience speaks louder than revenge. And now, the same family who once dismissed him points to him as an example. Neighbors tell his story to their children. Young men who feel overlooked look at him and see proof that betrayal is not the end of the road. It's the bend where strength is born. So here's the question. How many of us are still holding on to the bitterness of what we've lost? How many nights do we replay the betrayal instead of rewriting the ending? Maybe his story is a mirror for anyone who has been overlooked, underestimated, or pushed aside by the very people they trusted most. His quiet twist? Years later, the community awarded him a plaque, not for wealth, not for power, but for generosity. For building scholarships, mentoring youth, and proving that true wealth is measured not in square footage, but in impact. That's the legacy, not the house, not the betrayal, but the proof that you can lose everything and still end up with more than you ever dreamed. Because sometimes walking away in silence is not defeat. It's the first step toward a life so powerful, even your enemies can't look away. So the next time someone tells you that you're naive, that you trusted too much, or that your dreams were wasted, remember him. Remember that what looks like the end might just be the beginning. And ask yourself, if betrayal couldn't stop him, what's stopping you? Thanks for watching. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories and new videos.